The dog was still alive when Garrett Doss walked through the front door. That was the first thing the intake volunteer said to him. Not a greeting, not a question about whether he wanted to adopt or donate or fill out a form. Just that. The dog was still alive. As if she had read something in the way he crossed the parking lot that told her he needed to know that before anything else. The Millhaven County Animal Control Facility sat on the eastern edge of town, a low cinder block building with a gravel lot and a flag that had been faded by 2 hard winters into something almost white. The smell hit him before he made it through the second set of doors. Not cruelty. Just the compressed weight of too many animals in too small a space, the institutional scent of bleach and wet concrete, and something underneath that he could not name but recognized as waiting. He had come in because of a flyer, not even a proper one. A quarter sheet of white paper taped to the door of Reno's Diner on 2nd Street, printed in a font too small for most people to read without squinting. Someone had written at the bottom in blue pen, Shepherd Mix, 3 legs functional, Kennel 6, Thursday deadline. It was Tuesday. Garrett was 41 years old. He stood 6 feet even, built wide across the shoulders from years of carrying weight. And he moved the way men move when they have spent a long time making themselves small in spaces where a wrong step cost people their lives. He had a dark crew-cut going salt at the temples, a jaw that hadn't been fully shaved in 2 weeks, and a horizontal scar along his left cheekbone from a moment in Helmand Province that he still would not describe in detail to anyone who asked. His eyes were dark brown and carried the flat, measuring quality of someone who had not fully stopped working, even in rooms where no one expected him to be. He had been out of the Marines for 14 months. He was not sure what he was doing in Millhaven, Montana. He had driven through on his way to somewhere. He hadn't decided yet. And then he had stopped for coffee, and then he had been there 4 days without any particular reason. The volunteer led him down the row of kennels without being asked. The shepherd was in the last one. If you have never seen an animal that has given up on being seen, it is difficult to describe. The dog was not cowering. He was not trembling or pressing himself against the back wall or performing the frantic, attention-seeking display that the other dogs were offering through their chain-link doors. He was simply lying on his side on a thin rubber mat, facing the wall, breathing slowly. His coat was a brindle pattern that Garrett had not seen before on a shepherd, dark sable overlaid with faded tan, the kind of coloring that looked like it had been drawn with care and then left out in weather too long. His rear left leg was held at an angle that was not right, not injured in the moment, but long compensated for. The kind of bearing that meant the damage was old, and the animal had reorganized his whole body around it. "When did he come in?" Garrett asked. 11 days ago. Picked up off Route 9. No tags, no chip. Vet thinks the leg's been like that for a while. Not recent. Malformed or an old break that set badly." The volunteer paused. "He's been evaluated twice. He's not aggressive. He's just—" She stopped. "He's done," Garrett said. She didn't correct him. He crouched down at the door. The dog did not turn. Garrett stayed there for a moment, and then he did something he had not done in longer than he could account for. He waited without purpose. He did not wait for a specific outcome. He did not catalog his exits. He just crouched at a chain-link door in a cinder-block building in a town he was passing through, and waited to see what a dog decided. After 40 seconds, the shepherd turned his head. The dog looked at him for a long moment, the way that only certain animals look at people. Not as a greeting and not as an evaluation, but as if the looking itself was the only thing happening and deserved its full attention. Then he pushed himself upright with a deliberate slowness that made the compensation in his gait visible from the first motion, 3 legs doing the work of 4, and he walked to the door and sat. There was a number tattooed inside his ear. Garrett saw it when the dog pressed close to the chain link. He had to lean in to read it. His breath stopped. If you have never been part of a military working dog program, you might read a tattoo inside a dog's ear and see only numbers and letters. To someone who has operated alongside these animals, the format is as legible as a name badge. The alphanumeric sequence told Garrett exactly what kind of training the dog had received, what unit he had been assigned to, and approximately when he had been in service. He knew the unit. If this story stays with you, consider subscribing. Turn on the bell so you catch everyone. And watch this one until the very end. Garrett stood. The intake volunteer was watching him. "Who do I talk to about pulling him?" he said. It was not a question. The shelter director was a woman named Diane Perot, 53 years old, with close-cut gray hair and the kind of permanent tiredness around the eyes that comes from making impossible decisions for too long without enough resources. She had been running Millhaven County Animal Control for 9 years, and she had learned to read the people who came in with a different energy than the usual walk-ins, the ones who were there because of something specific rather than impulse or obligation. She looked at Garrett across her desk and said, "He was listed under the name Cato. That's what the transfer paperwork called him when we received him from the Deer Creek facility 2 weeks ago. They had him for a month before that. No owner ever claimed him. What's the backstory on the transfer?" She opened a folder. Deer Creek got him from a private rescue that pulled him from a property seizure in Gallatin County. The property seizure was related to an animal neglect investigation. There were 11 animals on the property. Cato was one of 3 dogs. She paused. The property was owned by a man named Delbert Roop. He's facing charges, but it's been slow. The animals were removed in October. October? It had been 7 months. Who was the handler? Garrett said. The dog's handler. Before he ended up wherever he ended up. Diane Perot's expression changed slightly. That's not something we have in our paperwork. No, but somebody does. He said it quietly, and she heard what was underneath it, and she did not argue. Garrett adopted Cato that afternoon. The fee was $40. He paid it in cash. He drove back to the motel on the edge of Millhaven with a German shepherd in the passenger seat, who sat absolutely still and looked at the road ahead with the air of someone returning from somewhere they had not expected to come back from. Garrett drove with both hands on the wheel and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. The dog did not look at him. He just watched the road. "You remember this?" Garrett said finally. Not a question. The dog's ear rotated slightly toward the sound of his voice. Garrett had spent 14 months trying not to think too specifically about the men he had served with. Not because the memories were unbearable, but because they were the opposite of unbearable. Because remembering the good ones made the present feel thin and wrong by comparison. And he had not found a way to carry both things at once. The weight of what was good about service and the weight of what it cost. He had been managing by moving, by keeping the geography changing fast enough that nothing had time to feel like home. He was not managing particularly well. The motel room was clean in the utilitarian way that rooms are clean when nobody expects you to stay. He set up a water bowl from a dollar store plastic container and spread his sleeping bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed and watched the dog drink. Cato drank for a long time. Then he turned, walked to the sleeping bag with that careful three-legged precision, lay down facing the door, and within 4 minutes was deeply asleep. Garrett sat there in the quiet and made a list in his head. The tattoo told him the unit. The unit had been based out of Camp Pendleton at the relevant time. There were people he still knew who could make a phone call. It would take a day or two. If the handler was still in service, it would be easy to find. If the handler was out, it would be harder but not impossible. If the handler was dead, he would know that too, and that information would mean something about how the dog had ended up where he had ended up. There was one other possibility he did not put on the list because it didn't belong on a list. It belonged somewhere else. He had served alongside a man named Denny Mack for 2 deployments. Denny had been a dog handler. Not the best one Garrett had ever seen, but the one with the deepest feeling for the animals. The one who talked to his dog during stand-down the way some men talk to their families back home. Denny had mustered out 2 years before Garrett. They had stayed in loose contact for 8 months, and then the contact had gone quiet, the way contact does when 2 people are both moving and neither one admits it. The last time Garrett had heard from Denny, he had been in Montana. He did not put that on the list. He sat with it instead. The next morning was cold for early May, a low gray sky pressing down on the mountains to the west like a lid. Garrett took Cato for a slow walk around the motel parking lot, watching the dogs gait with the same attention he used to give to terrain in unfamiliar country. The rear left leg carried almost no weight, but the dog moved with a fluid compensation that suggested years of practice. He was not in pain. He had built himself around the limitation, and he was doing fine. "You're good," Garrett told him, watching him navigate a curb. The dog glanced back briefly. Then he continued. Garrett spent the morning making calls from the motel room. He reached a man named Porter Shields, who had retired from the Corps as a master sergeant and now worked as a contractor in Quantico. Porter listened to the tattoo sequence Garrett read him without comment, and then he said, "Give me until this afternoon." In the meantime, Garrett drove to Reno's Diner. The diner sat on 2nd Street across from a hardware store that had been there long enough that the sign had been repainted twice without anyone changing the layout. Inside, it smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the specific warm wood smell of old booths. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, stocky and compact, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the economical movements of someone who had been working a counter for 30 years. Her name tag said, Bev. "You're the one who came in yesterday asking about the flyer," she said before he had sat down. "Word travels. In Millhaven, it travels before you do." She set a coffee in front of him without asking. "Did you get him?" "I got him." She studied him for a moment, not unfriendly. "You passing through or staying?" "Passing through," he said. She did not comment on this. She went and refilled someone else's cup and came back and set a menu down that he did not open. "Who put up the flyer?" he asked. "I did," she said. "I know Diane over at the shelter. She called me when the dog came in. She said he was the kind of dog that someone should know about before the deadline." "Why you?" "Because people come in here." He looked at her over the coffee cup. She had the frank, unhurried gaze of a person who had absorbed a lot of people's stories over a counter and stopped being surprised by most of them. There was something in her expression that was not pity, not quite, but was adjacent to recognition. "Did you know the dog?" he asked. "No. But I know a dog that's been handled when I see one. The way he waited. The way he didn't make noise even when the other ones were going crazy. That dog was trained to be quiet and wait." She moved away to take another order. He sat with his coffee. The call from Porter came at 2 in the afternoon. Garrett was in the parking lot of the dollar store, leaning against his truck. Cato was in the cab. Tattoo matches a dog assigned to 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion, Porter said. Working name was Cato. Handler was a corporal named Dennis, went by Denny. Garrett closed his eyes for a second. Mac, mustered out about 2.5 years ago, Porter continued. After he got out, I don't have solid information. I talked to a buddy who thought he'd heard Mac was living somewhere in Montana. That's all I've got. How did the dog end up separated from him? That I can't tell you from here. You'd have to find Mac. I'm working on it, Garrett said. He hung up and stood there for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then he opened the truck door. Cato looked at him from the passenger seat with that flat, assessing stillness. He's in Montana, Garrett said. The dog did not move. Yeah, Garrett said. I know. He got in the truck. Bev at the diner did not know that name, but she knew most of the county, and she made 3 phone calls while Garrett sat at the counter the following morning. And on the 3rd call, her expression shifted in a way that told him something before she even turned around. Donna Strikes out on the Flathead Road, she said. She says there's a man named Dennis been staying in the old Pruitt cabin on her property for about 8 months. He doesn't come into town much. She takes groceries out once a week. Is he all right? Bev set the phone down carefully. Donna says he's struggling. She didn't say struggling with what, but she said it twice. Garrett drove out the Flathead Road that afternoon. The road climbed away from town into a stretch of mountain country that was still showing the gray-brown of late winter at elevation. The pines dense and dark on the ridgeline, and the runoff gutters along the gravel road still running with snowmelt. The Strike property was marked by a mailbox with a number bent sideways and a cattle gate standing open. The cabin was set back 300 yards from the road, down a 2-track that wound through a stand of lodgepole pines. It was small and old, with a covered porch and a stovepipe chimney sending a thin stream of smoke into the gray afternoon. The windows had condensation on the inside. Garrett stopped the truck 50 feet from the cabin and sat. He did not get out right away. He watched the smoke from the chimney and the condensation on the glass, and listened to what the property was telling him. Cato was up on all 4 feet in the passenger seat, ears forward, nose working. The front door opened. The man who came out onto the porch was not the Denny that Garrett held in memory. The Denny had been wiry and quick, a talker, the kind of man who laughed before the punchline got there because he couldn't help himself. The man on the porch was thin in a way that read as deliberate reduction, as if he had been paring himself down to something smaller and easier to manage. He was 38 years old, but he stood with the posture of someone older, and the careful way he moved onto the porch and stopped there told Garrett something that made the air in his chest feel tight. Denny looked at the truck. He looked at the man in the cab, and then he looked at the dog. He did not move for a long time. Garrett opened the truck door. Cato came out on his own, landed on 3 legs, and stood there in the 2-track, looking at the porch. The sound that came out of Dennis Mack was not a word. It was not a cry, exactly. It was the specific release that happens when a person has been holding something in place by force for so long that the release is involuntary. He came down off the porch without looking at his feet and crossed the ground between him and the dog and went to his knees in the cold mud and put his hands on either side of Cato's face, and the dog leaned into him with his whole body. Garrett stood by the truck with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the mountain. He stayed that way for a while. When Denny finally stood, his face was wet, and he made no attempt to address that. He looked at Garrett for the first time directly and said, How? Flyer at a diner, Garrett said. Denny shook his head slowly. Then he said, "Come inside. I've got coffee." The cabin was small and very clean in the way that people's spaces get when order is the only thing they can reliably produce. There was a wood stove doing most of the work of heating the place, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a shelf of paperback books, no television, a single window over the table that looked out at the pines. They sat with their coffee, and Cato lay at Denny's feet, and the 3 of them were quiet for a while. "I lost him last October," Denny said finally. "I was in a bad stretch. I wasn't taking good care of things. A man named Delbert Roop offered to keep him for a while. I thought it was temporary." He looked down at the dog. "Roop wasn't who I thought he was." "I saw the file on the property seizure," Garrett said. Denny nodded. "By the time I understood what had happened, he was in the system. I couldn't navigate the system. I tried, but I couldn't." He turned his cup in his hands. "I thought he was gone," Garrett said. "What kind of bad stretch?" Denny looked at him. It was the look of a man deciding how much of a wall to leave standing. "The bad kind," he said. Garrett nodded. He did not push. He had learned in years of serving alongside men that the second time you ask something is usually the wrong time. The right time comes on its own, and you have to be present for it rather than manufacturing it. "What are you doing in Millhaven?" Denny asked. "Driving through?" "To where?" "Hadn't decided." Denny looked at him for a moment. "You have been doing that long?" 14 months, Garrett said. Something passed between them that did not require words. 2 men who had been trained to be present and purposeful, and who had been struggling to apply that training to the specific problem of their own lives. "I need to tell you something," Denny said. "All right. When I was in the bad stretch, I let a lot of things go. Not just Cato. I had a situation with a woman named Marcia Veldon. She's 74. She lives about 2 miles down the Flathead Road. Her husband passed 18 months ago, and she's been alone since. I used to check in on her. Run errands, help with what needed doing." He paused. "I stopped doing that when things got bad. I haven't been out there in 4 months." Garrett waited. "A couple of weeks ago, Donna Strike mentioned something to me. Said she'd heard Marcia was having trouble. Not with her health, with her property. Something about a company making offers on her land, and the offers turning into pressure, and the pressure turning into something that was harder to name." Denny's jaw moved. "I haven't gone to see her. I haven't been able to get myself out the door." Garrett set his cup down. "You can get yourself out the door tomorrow," he said. Denny looked at him. For a moment, his expression held something complicated, something caught between the old habit of deflection and something newer that didn't know how to settle. Then he nodded once. They drove out to her property the next morning, the 3 of them in Garrett's truck, Cato on the rear bench seat with his chin on the center console. The place was 43 acres of mixed grazing and timber that had been in her family since her father-in-law broke ground there in the early 1960s. The house was a white clapboard 2-story, modest and well-maintained until recently, when the reason could be read in the peeling corner trim and the gutters that had separated from the fascia on the north side and the gate in the front fence that was being held shut by a length of baling wire. She was 74 years old, 5'3", with white hair cut short, and the hands of a woman who had done ranch work her entire adult life, knuckled and capable, and carrying the dry, cracked weathering of a Montana winter and a widow's first year alone. Her eyes were blue and sharp, and when she opened the door and saw Denny standing on her porch, she did not say anything for a moment. She just looked at him. "Denny," she said finally, It was not reproach. It was something more patient than that. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said. She held the door open without comment, and they came in. The front room of the house had a quality that Garrett had noticed in certain homes. The lived-in arrangement of two people's life interrupted mid-arrangement. Objects that had not been moved because moving them would be an acknowledgement that the person who last touched them would not be coming back. A jacket on a peg, a pair of boots by the door. He did not look at those things directly. Cato moved through the room carefully, and then went to Marcia and stood close, and she put her hand on the dog's head with the automatic ease of someone who understood animals. "He was lost for a while," Denny said. "Garrett found him." She looked at Garrett with the evaluating attention of a woman who had lived long enough to read strangers quickly. "You drove through Millhaven," she said. "I did, and stayed." "It seems like," he said. She put the kettle on without asking whether anyone wanted tea. Over the next half hour, she described what had been happening. She did it plainly, without dramatics, the way a person describes a problem they have been trying to solve alone for months, and finally concedes they cannot. A company called Rafter Peak Land Partners had first contacted her 6 months ago. A man named Craig Sorrell had come to the house in a clean truck and sat at her kitchen table and explained that Rafter Peak was assembling a tract for a commercial timber operation and that her 43 acres were in the middle of it. He had made an offer. The offer was below market. She had said no. The calls came after. Not threatening exactly. Informative. Letting her know that the road easement on the eastern boundary of her property had a cloud on the title. That the well permit might not survive an audit. That the timber on her back 40 might be subject to a state trespass claim based on an old survey error. Nothing direct. Always informative, always polite, always delivered in a voice that remained smooth and professional, regardless of what it was actually saying. She had called a lawyer. The lawyer had looked at the easement question and said it was real but manageable. Then the lawyer had called back 2 weeks later and said he would not be able to continue representing her. No reason given. "When did the offer come back?" Garrett asked. 3 weeks ago, lower than the first one. She wrapped both hands around her tea mug. Craig Sorrell brought it himself. He sat right there, and he said the market had moved, and the complications with the title made the land harder to value. She paused. "He was very pleasant." Cato, who had been lying at her feet, lifted his head. Garrett noted this. "Has he been back since?" he said. "He called last Friday. He said they needed an answer by the end of the month." The end of the month was 11 days away. Garrett looked at Denny. Denny was looking at the table. "Does anyone else know about this?" Garrett asked her. "I told Donna Strike. I told my daughter in Missoula, and she told me to get a lawyer, which I tried to do." She looked out the window for a moment. "There's a man in town, Raymond Hupp. He used to work for the county assessor's office. He's been retired for years. He's the one I'd have gone to first, normally. He's the one who knows about property things around here. But he's been having health problems." "Who's your daughter's name?" "Nora. Nora Veldon. And she's in Missoula." "She is." Garrett spent that afternoon at the kitchen table with a legal pad and the paperwork that Marcia had accumulated. The 2 written offers from Rafter Peak Land Partners. The letter from her first attorney withdrawing from representation. The county records she had pulled on the easement. A survey map from 1987 that Garrett had to squint to read, and a stack of phone records showing the calls from a number registered to a Rafter Peak LLC with a Billings address. Cato lay under the table. Denny sat across from Garrett and sorted through documents without speaking. There was something different in the way he was sitting than there had been in the cabin. He was not smaller. He was, in fact, slightly more like the man Garrett remembered from 2 deployments back, the one who could focus when there was something specific to focus on. The easement question was the first thing. The road that crossed the eastern edge of Marcia's property had been used by the adjacent landowner for decades under what appeared to be an informal arrangement, never formally recorded. The cloud on title that Sorrell had mentioned was real, but whether it was legally significant was a different question. That required a title attorney, not just a general practitioner. The well permit was the second thing. Garrett had worked in enough rural areas to know that groundwater regulations in Montana had gone through several significant changes, and that old permits sometimes required renewal that owners were not always notified about. If Rafter Peak had done enough research to identify a lapsed renewal, that was not casual pressure. That was preparation. The third thing, the survey error on the back timber, was the one that concerned him most, because it was also the most difficult to evaluate without a licensed surveyor. Rafter Peak had done significant homework on this property. That kind of research was not done casually or cheaply. It was done when a company had decided the acquisition mattered enough to prepare the ground. "They want this land specifically," Garrett said. Denny looked up. "Why this one?" "I don't know yet. But someone paid a lawyer or a title company to do title research on a 74-year-old woman's rural property, and then someone paid another lawyer to identify a well permit compliance issue, and then somebody made a phone call to the first attorney she hired." He tapped the withdrawal letter. "No reason given is a reason." Denny looked at the letter. "We need Raymond," he said. Raymond Hupp was 71 years old, barrel-chested and slow-moving since a hip replacement the previous spring, with a white mustache and the kind of institutional memory that only accumulates when a person has spent 30 years watching one piece of geography and paying attention. He lived 4 miles from Marcia's property in a house he had built himself in the late 1980s, and he came to the door in a cardigan and looked at Garrett and Denny and Cato on his porch with the expression of a man who had been waiting for something to require his attention. "I heard Marca was having trouble," he said. "I've been in no shape to be useful." "You are now," Denny said. He let them in. Over the next 2 hours, he demonstrated why certain kinds of knowledge could not be duplicated from files alone. He knew every property transaction in a 20-mile radius going back to the 1970s. He knew which landowners had sold to whom and for how much and under what circumstances. He knew which attorneys in the county had worked for corporate interests before setting up local practices. He knew the name of the company that Rafter Peak Land Partners had used for its title research because he recognized the methodology from a similar operation that had tried to acquire a tract of ranch land on the other side of the valley 4 years ago. "That one didn't go through," he said. "The family held, but before they held, the same sequence happened. The title cloud, the permit question, the withdrawn attorney, and there was a company called Summit Ridge Acquisitions behind it then." "Is Summit Ridge connected to Rafter Peak?" Garrett asked. "I'd want to look at the registered agents," Raymond said. "But my guess is yes." He reached for a legal pad of his own. "I know a woman at the county clerk's office. She's been there longer than I have." The county clerk's name was Patsy Olson, and she had access to every business registration filing in the county for the past 40 years. And she pulled the registered agent information for both Rafter Peak Land Partners and Summit Ridge Acquisitions inside of 20 minutes after a phone call from Raymond. The same registered agent name appeared on both filings. A limited liability company based in Billings called Crestview Administrative Services. Same address, same date of formation, 2 months before Summit Ridge's first operation, and 2 months before Rafter Peak's current campaign. They reset, Raymond said. When the first company name gets too much attention, they reset with a new operating name, but keep the same administrative infrastructure. Garrett looked at what they had. It was not nothing. A pattern of operation that connected two separate acquisition campaigns, a shared administrative entity, a methodology that involved researching title vulnerabilities, applying pressure through professional channels, and then making offers below market. None of it was illegal on its face. That was the problem. The lawyer withdrawed, Denny said. That's the part that's hard to explain by accident. It is, Garrett agreed. You can't prove it without the attorney talking, and attorneys don't talk about why they withdraw. There's someone who might talk, Raymond said. He did not say the name for a moment. Then he said, Ellen Pruitt. She's a legal aid attorney in Kalispell. She's been tracking predatory land acquisition in rural western Montana for about 3 years. She's got a file that I suspect is a lot thicker than what we've assembled this afternoon. Garrett called. She answered on the second ring. She was not surprised by what he described. She was, in fact, the kind of not surprise that comes from having heard a version of the same story many times and having spent a long time waiting for someone to bring her specifics. She asked 4 questions, each of them precise and without preamble, and she listened to the answers without comment. And at the end she said, I can be in Millhaven Thursday morning. What do you need from us between now and then? Photographs of all the written communications, copies of the title records, a statement from Mrs. Veldon on the timeline of contacts. And if anyone knows another landowner who went through a similar process with either of these companies, I need their name and I need them willing to talk. Raymond knew too. The next 2 days moved differently than the days before them had. Garrett had spent 14 months in a state of purposeless forward motion, driving from one place to the next with no particular destination and no particular reason. And the thing that happened over those 2 days was that the motion stopped and the purpose arrived, and he understood the difference the way you understand the difference between wind and weather. One is something that happens to you, and one is something you move inside of. Denny was there every morning. He drove out to Marcia's property and helped Garrett document the communications, photograph the paperwork, walk the fence line of the eastern easement with a phone taking GPS coordinates. His color improved. He ate the lunches that Marcia made without being told that they were ready. He talked to Cato in a low voice while they worked, not words exactly, just the vocal register that the dog had recognized for years. Bev at the diner sent food out on the second afternoon through a woman named Carol Adkins, who drove a green pickup and arrived with a covered dish and no explanation, except that Bev had heard they were working out at Marcia's and thought people working needed feeding. She stayed long enough to meet Raymond and ask 3 direct questions about the land situation, and then she drove away. That evening, Nora Veldon arrived from Missoula. She was 46, a little taller than her mother, with the same sharp blue eyes and a composure that became slightly unsteady when she walked in and saw her mother sitting at the kitchen table with 2 veterans, a retired county assessor, and a German shepherd, surrounded by legal documents and empty coffee cups. I've been trying to get you to call someone for 3 months, she said to Marcia. I called someone, Marcia said. He drove through town. Nora looked at Garrett. Thank you, she said. He shook his head. Raymond's the one who matters in the morning. Ellen Pruitt arrived Thursday at 9:30. She was 44, compact and deliberate in her movements, with the particular listening quality of a person who had been trained to hear not just what was said, but what arrangement was being made by the saying. She sat at the kitchen table across from Marcia and took notes on a yellow pad with a mechanical pencil and asked the same precise questions from the phone call, plus 40 more. She reviewed the documentation that Garrett and Denny had assembled. She looked at the registered agent connection that Raymond had identified and asked him to walk her through how he had found it. "This is consistent with what I have from 2 other landowners in Flathead County," she said. "And I have a 3rd case in Lincoln County that has some of the same methodology." She turned a page on her pad. "The attorney withdrawal is the piece I've been trying to document. Do you know who the attorney was?" Marcia gave her the name. She wrote it down and looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "He withdrew from another client in a Rafter Peak situation in Mineral County 6 months ago. Same language in the withdrawal letter. No reason given." The room was quiet. "That's a pattern," Denny said. "It is. And a pattern in withdrawal letters is something the State Bar takes seriously when it's documented." She set her pencil down. "I can file an ethics complaint to the bar on the attorney. I can file a complaint with the Montana Department of Justice Consumer Protection Office on Rafter Peak. I can also contact the Flathead County District Attorney's Office and give them what we have on the connected acquisitions." She looked at Marcia. "None of this happens in 11 days. I want you to understand that." "What happens in 11 days?" Marcia asked. "You decline to respond to the deadline. In writing, I'll draft the letter. You send it from your address. It goes through me as your legal representative, and it informs Rafter Peak Land Partners that you are represented by legal counsel and that all future contact should be directed to my office." She looked at Marcia steadily. "The deadline is their tool. You don't have to pick it up." The silence in the room held for a moment. Cato, who had been in the corner, got up and walked to Marcia and stood close. Marcia put her hand on his back. "All right," she said. "He called that Friday. He called the house number. The call went to voicemail because Marcia did not answer a number she did not recognize anymore, and the voicemail was brief and professional and made reference to the approaching deadline in the same pleasant, informative tone that all of his prior communications had used. Garrett listened to the voicemail with Marcia, and then helped her prepare the response in writing per Ellen's instructions. It was 3 sentences. "We are represented by counsel. Contact should be directed to the named attorney. We have no further communication on this matter at this time." Sorrell did not call back. Raymond confirmed the next week that Rafter Peak Land Partners had also been quietly approaching 2 other landowners on adjacent properties, both of whom had held. With her help, both landowners were connected to the legal aid office, and their situations were added to the consolidated complaints. In the 3rd week of May, the Montana Department of Justice Consumer Protection Office acknowledged receipt of the complaint against Rafter Peak Land Partners. The State Bar acknowledged the ethics complaint against the attorney. Neither of these things resolved quickly, and she told everyone involved not to expect quick resolution. "The companies that operate this way," she said, "operate on the assumption that their targets are isolated. They do not operate well in the presence of documentation and multiple complainants and a legal aid attorney who has been building a file for 3 years." 2 days after the consumer protection acknowledgement, Rafter Peak withdrew its outstanding offer on Marcia Veldon's property. The withdrawal letter cited a change in project scope. Raymond read it and said the phrasing was standard and did not mean the company was gone forever, only that they were pausing. "Pausing is enough," Nora said. She had stayed for 2 weeks. She was still there, sleeping in her old room at the top of the stairs. The afternoon the withdrawal letter arrived, Garrett was sitting on Marcia's porch with his coffee, and Cato was at the edge of the yard where the gravel met the grass, lying in a patch of thin May sunshine, doing nothing in particular. The mountains to the west were still showing white at the higher elevations, but the valley floor had come fully to green. And the quality of the light at 4 in the afternoon was the specific amber that belonged to a Montana spring evening, warm and low and without urgency. Denny came out of the house and sat down in the other porch chair. They sat there for a while. Donna Streich mentioned the property 2 roads over from the cabin, Denny said. The parish place. It's been vacant for 2 years. She said the son is looking for someone to take it on a long-term lease, caretaker arrangement. Garrett looked at the mountains. That right, he said. Modest. Has a shop with a wood stove. Denny paused. Decent fencing. Garrett looked at Cato in the yard. The dog had rolled onto his side in the sun and was breathing slowly. His 3 working legs were stretched out, and his compromised leg was tucked close, and he looked for all the world like an animal that had arrived somewhere and knew it. You're staying, Garrett said. It was not a question. I think so. Denny's voice was quiet. I've got some repairing to do. Not on property. He looked at his hands. I've talked to someone. An actual professional, someone. Started last Tuesday. Garrett nodded. You don't have to go, Denny said. Garrett drank his coffee. The evening light moved across the yard, and the mountains held their white at the peaks, and Cato breathed slowly in the grass, and the porch boards were old and solid under his boots. He thought about 14 months of roads that did not go anywhere in particular, of coffee in towns he did not return to, of the specific tiredness that was not physical, the kind that settled in when a person removed themselves from everything that asked something of them and discovered that the asking was what they had been living on. The cabin on the parish property, he said. 2 bedrooms, Denny said. More than one person needs. Garrett set his cup down on the porch rail and looked at the yard where the dog lay in the late sun. He had come to Millhaven because of a quarter sheet of paper taped to a diner door, because of numbers inside an ear, because of a tattoo that meant something to him that he could not have fully explained and did not need to. He had not come intending to stay. He had not come intending anything. Intention and arrival were different things. He had learned that in the Corps, and he had somehow forgotten it in the 14 months since, and Millhaven had reminded him. I'll look at it tomorrow, he said. Denny said nothing. Something in the set of his shoulders changed, the way a door sounds different when it closes and latches than when it swings shut and catches only air. Inside the house, Marcia was cooking something that smelled like onions and thyme, and Nora was on the phone with someone from the legal aid office, and Raymond's truck was in the driveway because he had stopped by to talk easement paperwork and had not yet left, and Bev had sent a pie through Carol Adkins again, which was sitting on the kitchen counter. The light went on in the window above the kitchen sink, warm and yellow against the evening. Cato lifted his head from the grass, looked at the house for a moment, and then lay back down. He was home. He had been home for 11 days, and he was starting to look it. And the man sitting on the porch with his cold coffee and his old boots and his first good reason in 14 months was starting to look it too, even if he had not said it yet, even if he would not say it for another few days, when he signed the lease on the parish place and drove back to the diner on 2nd Street and sat at the counter and ordered coffee, and Bev poured it without asking, and did not say anything about the fact that he had driven through and stayed, because in Millhaven, that was not a thing that required comment. It was just a thing that happened sometimes, to certain people, in certain seasons, when they were ready for it without knowing they were ready. He left a decent tip. Cato was in the truck. The mountains were still there. There are dogs in this world who carry the memory of good work and good service, and sometimes the world is careless with them. And sometimes the carelessness is no one's fault, and sometimes it is everyone's. And what matters in the end is whether someone stops, whether someone crouches at the chain-link door and waits without purpose and lets the animal decide. You've been carrying something today, maybe for a long time. Maybe the weight is a place you left, or a person you could not help, or a version of yourself that used to know what it was doing. This story is not a solution to that. It is, though, a reminder that the tattoo inside the ear, the number that means something to exactly the right person at exactly the right moment, is sometimes there. And the right person does not always know they are the right person until they have already made the choice. Be the person who crouches down. Be the person who waits. There is always more goodness in the world than the world makes visible, and the people who find it are almost never looking for it. They are just driving through. And then they stop. May God bless you and keep the ones you love. Watch your door tonight. Watch who comes to it.